that true? Joining us is our legal panel, Alex Little, defense attorney, former assistant federal prosecutor, and Michael J. Moore, former U.S. attorney and partner at Pope & Montgomery. Alex, let me start with you. Mueller and executive privilege will certainly come up at the hearing. What do you expect?
Well, I think there's been some suggestion in the press recently from the president's lawyer that they are going to try to assert executive privilege over part of the special counsel's report if he produces a report. And I think senators are going to press pretty hard to get some assurances from the potential new attorney general that they'll be able to see what Mueller has put together in terms of evidence about potential obstruction of justice and things of that sort.
What would it mean, Alex, if the White House lawyers did actually try to claim executive privilege?
Well, I think at this point they've realized, early on they could have asserted executive privilege in the investigation. They chose not to do so. That's become really controversial. And so now if they do it at this stage, it's going to be, I think, really problematic, both because you have House Judiciary Committee that's now run by the Democrats that will be able to subpoena things, will be able to cause problems, and ultimately it would end up in court.
Michael, other presidents, as you know, have tried to assert executive privilege. President Obama in Fast and Furious, Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky, Richard Nixon, of course, at the famous Watergate tapes. What do you expect?
I think it's likely that he'll try to exert executive privilege. It's pretty clear to me that he's putting together a team to do just that as they hire new lawyers. But you've got to remember that the cloak of executive privilege is not meant to be a shield for wrongdoing. And so I don't think there'll be a lot of success in trying to cover that up. Probably if there's a move to assert too much executive privilege, I'm guessing now with the Democrats in control of the House, you'll likely see subpoenas issued. You'll likely see hearings held quickly. We're going to get the information at some point. I just don't know if there's a stomach in the GOP to let this thing linger anymore, because they don't want to be seen necessarily as the shield blocking the public's attention from the Mueller report.
Yeah, and isn't it true, Michael, I guess, that even if executive privilege, which would be really controversial, and that would be attacked, while others would support it, Michael, I mean, the Democrats in Congress, they could call Mueller to testify in front of Congress and spill the beans on everything, right?
I mean, they have oversight authority now. They have oversight powers in the committees to call witnesses, to look into things, to push further. They're going to get information. They can call the Attorney General. I mean, it just would be a protracted proceeding. My guess is we would end up again with some type of court action, and that doesn't do anyone any good. I mean, the problem is this has been a particularly terrible week for the administration, with the information coming out about information actually transferring from the campaign to the Russians, and that's been the link that's been missing in this chain. And so I think once that happened, you're going to see no appetite in GOP senators to basically become the protector. You're going to have some who are in safe districts. Maybe they're not running in 2020. I'm sure they may be the more vocal protectors, but I don't think you're going to see that from folks who may be up against an election challenge.
And then you're going to have the questions about his views of Robert Mueller's investigation and what he wrote in a 20-page ruling or actually it's a memo, June 8th. Sure. 2018. Alex, I got it right here, and I mean it really goes through. It's a legal argument, tremendous legal argument against one part of Mueller's investigation, dealing with obstruction of justice. What do you think the Democrats will try to hammer him with?
Well, I think what they'll hammer on is that there's a lot of assumptions that Mr. Barr makes in that memorandum, that the facts are this, the facts are that even now time has sort of taken over and shown that that's not all that the special counsel is looking at. This is not just an obstruction of justice investigation. I think, as Mr. Moore pointed out just a second ago, there's now some very clear links through Paul Manafort to the Russian intelligence services that touch with the campaign. I mean, the special counsel investigation has gone on long enough that they now know they have the goods. And so the question is, what are they going to do with it? And I don't think Bob Barr is going to be able to stop that, even if he wanted to.
Now, when you say they have the goods, what do you think specifically they have? And I mean, the evidence publicly so far does not tie the president himself to any of this.
But I think, Eric, that one qualifier, public evidence that we know about so far, I think it's very clear from the way they've handled the Manafort investigation, and particularly the recent back and forth with the judge about Manafort's cooperation deal, which is now off the table, that they have intercepts, they have electronic evidence, they have things to corroborate that Manafort was communicating with individuals that had ties to Russia, that he knew or should have known had ties to Russia. And so I think those pieces are becoming clear enough behind the scene, just at the edges now, that we're going to get to that point where they'll be able to assert some pretty clear connection between the campaign and the Russian intelligence services.
Michael, do you think that's where this is all heading?
I think so. I think you need to remember a couple of things. Also, there's been this new information about a counterintelligence investigation that's been going on and was started about the time that Jim Comey was fired. That information, in order for it to be classified up through an investigation, the FBI has their own internal process for doing that and different classifications as they go forward. There had to be some pretty significant information available for the higher-ups there to move that case, or at least open a file, an investigative file in that manner. And it's not particularly unusual to have a criminal case and this counterintelligence thing going on at the same time. What's significant is that the person whose name was on the head of the investigative file was the President of the United States. And so my guess is, and I totally agree with my colleague here, and that is that what you're talking about is what we know publicly, but people in the law enforcement community, perhaps in the FBI, Bob Mueller's team certainly has information that we don't have. And what's going to be interesting, and I would suggest this kind of going full circle to you were talking about the confirmation hearing coming up and whether or not the memo and what it means. The first question that ought to be asked of Mr. Barr, and I understand him to be a very fine man and a good lawyer, but the first question would be, I'd like to see the memo you wrote sort of criticizing the special counsel, Ken Starr, as he investigated the Clinton file. And this, I mean, he submits a memo at this point, and he wasn't even the Attorney General, but yet he does an unsolicited memo saying that the investigation lacks merit. Those words are going to come back, and my guess is we're going to have a protracted confirmation process simply because that's going to draw the ire of the Democratic senators on the committee.
And quickly, 10 seconds, do you think, Michael, that we will eventually learn if there is more through the Mueller report that you just basically said potentially could be there?
I don't think there's any question we're going to get more. I mean, I think you've seen Bob Mueller sort of going methodically through his investigation. We're learning more every day. You can look at the number of indictments and things coming out. There's certainly more to hear, and he's just following the money. And once we get to that place, I think it'll all make sense.
And Alex?
Exactly. They're not going to be able to hide the truth for too much longer.
Alex and Michael, fascinating. We'll see what happens in these hearings and seeing if what you just predicted eventually does come true. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's good to be with you.
All right, then.
And the heat is on.